August 1st, 1944, Avranches, France. The thunder of tank engines rolled across the Norman countryside like a mechanical storm. Columns of M4 Sherman tanks stretched for miles, their steel treads churning through dust and pulverized stone. Lieutenant General George S. Patton Jr. stood in the turret of his command half-track, ivory-handled revolvers gleaming at his hips, surveying what would become one of the most audacious military gambles of World War II. His Third Army, over 200,000 men in 7 divisions, was finally being unleashed. Operation Cobra had shattered the German defensive line. The narrow corridor at Avranches, squeezed between the Atlantic coast and the hedgerow-choked Bocage countryside, now stood open. General Omar Bradley, commander of the 12th Army Group and Patton's direct superior, had issued clear orders. Exploit the gap, push into Brittany, secure the deep-water ports of Brest and St. Malo. Standard objectives. Measured advances. The methodical warfare that won campaigns through logistics and careful coordination. Patton had other plans. August 1st to 3rd, 1944, somewhere in France. The Third Army moved faster than anyone at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF, anticipated. Patton had been activated just hours earlier, but he drove his divisions as if they were weeks behind schedule. Bypass resistance. He ordered his tank commanders. Keep moving. Never stop for anything that doesn't block the road. Infantry divisions leapfrogged each other. Entire armored columns operated at a tempo that seemed to violate the fundamental laws of military logistics. Tanks ran on fumes. Supply trucks raced forward to catch units that had already moved beyond their expected positions. Patton's operational philosophy was simple, brutal, and effective. Speed is armor. At SHAEF headquarters in Portsmouth, England, staff officers plotted Third Army's positions on situation maps using standard reporting intervals. They waited for Patton's regular updates. They marked his expected progress based on the operational plan Bradley had approved. The radios stayed quiet. Patton's Signal Corps maintained minimal communication with higher headquarters. Updates arrived sparse and vague, sometimes hours late, sometimes not at all. When staff officers requested clarification on Third Army's exact location, responses came back maddeningly imprecise, somewhere east of Avranches. Making good progress. Light resistance. The radio silence wasn't accidental. Patton had ordered his communications officers to restrict outgoing traffic to absolute necessities. He wanted his army to move faster than information could travel. Faster. By August 3rd, reconnaissance units reported German forces in full retreat, abandoning equipment, fleeing eastward in disorder. The enemy wasn't just defeated, they were running, and Patton intended to run them into the ground. His tank columns barely paused at the turn south into Brittany. The ports could wait. Patton saw something bigger. The entire German position in France was collapsing. If he turned east instead of south, if he drove deep into the French interior while the enemy was still reeling, he could trap entire armies. He could end the war in France before autumn. So he kept driving east without authorization, without informing Bradley, without telling anyone at SHAEF what he was actually doing. August 4th, 1944, SHAEF headquarters, Portsmouth. The morning briefing began like every other. Staff officers gathered around the operations table, coffee in hand, updating situation maps with colored pins and grease pencil marks. Blue arrows showed Allied positions. Red arrows tracked German movements. Everything neat. Everything accounted for. Except Third Army. Major General Harold Pinky Bull, Eisenhower's G3 operations chief, stood over the map of France with his arms crossed. The blue arrows representing Patton's divisions hadn't moved in 18 hours. Not because Third Army had stopped, but because no one knew where Third Army actually was. Bull had sent 3 requests for position updates overnight. All 3 came back with the same vague responses. Third Army advancing as planned. Meeting objectives. We'll provide detailed report when tactical situation permits. That last phrase bothered Bull most. When tactical situation permits, that was language commanders used when they were too busy fighting to file paperwork. but intelligence reports showed minimal German resistance in 3rd Army sector. The enemy was retreating, not fighting. So what tactical situation was keeping Patton too busy to report his position? General Omar Bradley arrived from his tactical headquarters in Normandy that afternoon. He walked into the operations room, expecting to see 3rd Army's progress marked clearly across Brittany. Instead, he found staff officers clustered around the map, arguing in hushed voices about where Patton might actually be. Bradley studied the map in silence. The last confirmed position showed 3rd Army's lead elements near Rennes, capital of Brittany. That was yesterday's information, maybe the day before. Hard to tell when reports were so sporadic. Bradley had commanded Patton before, in Sicily, in North Africa. He knew the man's tendencies, the aggressive instincts, the willingness to interpret orders creatively. But even Patton couldn't just disappear an entire army. Could he? August 4th to 5th, 1944, German 7th Army Headquarters. Ironically, the German commanders noticed Patton's movements before SHAEF did. Wehrmacht intelligence reports painted an impossible picture. American armor appearing in sectors that should have been secure. Entire divisions materializing on roads that Reconnaissance had cleared hours earlier. Radio intercepts captured frantic German messages trying to locate and track 3rd Army's movements. The Americans are everywhere and nowhere, one Panzer commander reported. They're moving too fast. At SHAEF, British liaison officers began bringing their own intelligence to daily coordination meetings, reports from French resistance networks, intercepted German radio traffic, reconnaissance photos from RAF flights. None of it matched what SHAEF's map showed. A French resistance cell reported American tanks passing through Laval, 60 miles east of where 3rd Army should have been. Another group sent word of American columns moving through Mayenne, even farther east. The reports seemed impossible. Those towns weren't even in 3rd Army's operational zone. The German intercepts told a more alarming story. Wehrmacht units were calling for reinforcements to stop American penetrations that shouldn't exist. Panzer divisions reported engaging 3rd Army elements in locations that made no tactical sense. The enemy was tracking Patton's movements better than his own headquarters. Bradley requested a direct radio connection to 3rd Army headquarters. The call went through after a 30-minute delay. Patton's chief of staff came on the line, calm, professional, utterly unhelpful. 3rd Army is advancing on all objectives. Resistance remains light. General Patton is forward with the lead elements and will provide a full briefing when he returns to headquarters. What's your exact position? Bradley demanded. I can't provide exact coordinates at this time, sir. Operational security. The general's orders. Another phrase that rang hollow. The Germans clearly knew where 3rd Army was. The only people being kept in the dark were Patton's own superiors. August 5th, 1944, SHAEF operations room. By August 5th, the evidence became impossible to ignore. Aerial reconnaissance photos showed American tank columns on roads leading due east, not south into Brittany, but east toward Paris, toward the German border, toward objectives that weren't in anyone's operational plan. Staff officers began calculating distances. If those photos showed 3rd Army's actual positions, Patton had advanced over 60 miles beyond his authorized objectives in less than 4 days. Without telling anyone, without asking permission, without coordinating with adjacent units or ensuring his flanks were secured. It was either the most brilliant exploitation in modern military history or the most reckless act of insubordination anyone at SHAEF had ever witnessed. General Dwight D. Eisenhower received the briefing in his office that evening. He listened without interrupting as Bull laid out the evidence. The missing reports, the German intercepts, the reconnaissance photos, the growing certainty that Patton had taken 3rd Army completely off mission. When Bull finished, Eisenhower stood and walked to the wall map. He stared at the red and blue arrows for a long moment, jaw working, hands clasped behind his back. The room stayed silent. Finally, Eisenhower spoke. His voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of quiet that made experienced officers nervous. Get Patton on the radio. Not as chief of staff. Not as operations officer. Patton himself. and tell him to report to headquarters in person. Tomorrow. The message reached Patton just after dawn. He was standing in a commandeered French schoolhouse, studying maps spread across a teacher's desk, when his aide handed him the decoded transmission. Report to SHAEF headquarters immediately. Personal order from General Eisenhower. Patton read it twice, then folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. He turned back to the map. His finger traced roads leading east from Le Mans. Chartres was 40 miles ahead. Beyond Paris, the entire German position in France was coming apart. Every hour his tanks kept moving was an hour the enemy couldn't use to regroup. But Eisenhower's summons couldn't be ignored. Not this time. August 6, 1944, over the English Channel. The flight back gave Patton time to prepare his defense. He sat in the cramped seat, 47 transport, engine noise making conversation impossible, rehearsing arguments in his mind. He hadn't disobeyed orders. He'd exploited opportunity. That's what armor commanders were supposed to do. Find the weak point. Drive through. Keep moving until something stopped you. And nothing had stopped Third Army. Not the Germans, not the weather, not logistics. Only Eisenhower's summons. He knew what the staff officers would say. That he'd exceeded his authority, broken radio discipline, advanced without coordination. All true, all irrelevant. The operational plan was written before anyone knew the Germans would collapse this completely. Plans changed. Good commanders adapted. The transport landed at Portsmouth in late afternoon. A staff car waited on the tarmac. No honor guard, no welcoming committee. Just a stone-faced driver who said nothing during the ride to headquarters. August 6, 1944, Eisenhower's office, SHAEF. Bradley met Patton outside Eisenhower's office. The two men had known each other for decades, West Point classmates, fellow commanders in North Africa and Sicily. But today there were no pleasantries. "They've spent 4 days trying to find you, George," Bradley said quietly. "The Germans knew where you were before we did. You're 60 miles beyond your authorized advance. 60 miles deep into France, without clearance, without coordination, without a single word. What did the Germans do after we broke through?" Patton asked. Bradley blinked. "They retreated. They're still retreating." "Exactly. So I kept advancing. That's what you do when the enemy runs. You chase him. You don't stop to file position reports." Bradley shook his head. "It's not that simple. Ike is furious. The British are demanding explanations. The entire command structure." The office door opened. Eisenhower stood in the doorway, looking at Patton for a long moment without speaking. Then he stepped aside and gestured toward the office. Inside, the atmosphere felt like the air before a thunderstorm. Eisenhower moved behind his desk, but didn't sit. He remained standing, hands flat on the desktop, leaning forward slightly, the posture of a man containing considerable anger through physical control. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Explain to me, George, why Third Army's current position bears no resemblance to its assigned objectives. Why 60 miles of French territory have been captured without authorization. Why an entire army operated in radio silence for 4 days while every other Allied unit maintained proper communication." Patton began his defense. He spoke about the fluidity of the situation, the speed of the German collapse, the opportunity to trap entire enemy armies if Third Army kept pushing east instead of turning south into Brittany. "The ports aren't going anywhere," Patton argued. "The German army is. Every day spent following the old plan is a day wasted while the enemy escapes." Eisenhower let him finish. Then he asked a simple question that cut through every tactical justification. "Who authorized you to change the plan?" Silence stretched. Patton had no answer. No one had authorized the change. He'd simply made it, decided on his own that his judgment superseded the operational plan. Eisenhower walked to the window overlooking Portsmouth Harbor. Patton remained at attention. Bradley stood near the door, silent witness to the confrontation. When Eisenhower spoke, he didn't turn around. "The tactical situation is actually better than we'd hoped. Third Army's advance caught the Germans completely off balance. Those are my problems, George." He turned from the window. "My problems are structural. Problems of command. Problems of trust. Eisenhower outlined them methodically. Every Allied army operated as part of a coordinated whole. Montgomery's forces in the north, Bradley's in the center, Patton's Third Army as one component of that larger machine. Coordination required communication. Communication required honesty. And honesty required commanders to report what they were actually doing, not what they'd been authorized to do. You broke that trust, Eisenhower said. For 4 days, SHAEF planned operations based on false assumptions about where you were and what you were doing. Adjacent units had no idea American armor was operating in sectors they thought were empty. The entire command structure operated blind because one general decided his mission was more important than everyone else's. Eisenhower's voice hardened. What if the Germans had counterattacked your exposed flanks? What if your supply lines had been cut while you were 60 miles beyond supporting distance? What if another Allied unit had called for artillery in your sector, not knowing you were there, and hit your own men by mistake? Patton had answers for all of it. His reconnaissance had confirmed the German retreat. His logistics officers kept supplies flowing. His radio operators monitored adjacent frequencies to avoid friendly fire. I took risks, Patton admitted, but calculated risks, the kind that win wars. You're right about one thing, Eisenhower said. The advance was brilliant, aggressive, exactly the kind of exploitation that armored warfare demands. But that doesn't excuse the insubordination. That doesn't justify the radio silence. That doesn't make it acceptable for a field commander to unilaterally rewrite the operational plan. Eisenhower returned to his desk. I have to be able to trust my subordinates, not just to execute orders, but to communicate honestly about what they're doing. Montgomery reports his positions. Hodges reports his positions. Devers reports his positions. Every other army commander in this theater maintains proper communication, letting the weight of the next words sink in. If I can't trust you to follow basic protocols, if I can't rely on Third Army's reports being accurate, then how can I keep you in command? The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Eisenhower had relieved commanders for less. One word from the Supreme Commander, and Patton would be on a plane back to the States, his war over, his reputation destroyed. Bradley finally spoke, suggesting a middle path. Let Patton return to Third Army. Let him continue the advance. But from this point forward, position reports every 12 hours. No exceptions. No dilas. And any future deviation from assigned objectives required explicit authorization from Army Group Headquarters before execution. Eisenhower considered this. He studied Patton, measuring the man, trying to determine if the general standing before him could actually follow those restrictions, or if this confrontation would simply repeat itself. Patton wanted to argue, to defend, to explain that wars weren't won by men who waited for permission. But he was smart enough to recognize the edge of a cliff when he stood on it. He said the only thing that might save his career. I acknowledge the communication failures. I accept responsibility for the coordination problems. You have my word. Third Army will maintain proper reporting protocols going forward. Eisenhower studied him for a long moment. Then he made his decision. You'll retain command. Third Army will continue its advance. But this is the last time, George. The next communication failure, the next unauthorized deviation, the next time SHAEF has to guess where you actually are, and you'll be relieved immediately. No second chances. No appeals. Patton saluted, sharp, precise. The salute of a man who'd just been given a reprieve and knew it. Eisenhower returned it with equal formality. The meeting was over. August 1944 to May 1945. Patton returned to France the next morning. His staff noticed the change immediately. Position reports transmitted with mechanical regularity every 12 hours. Exact coordinates. Current strength. Anticipated movements. The advance continued. Third Army pushed deeper into France through August and September. Chartres fell. Orleans fell. The Seine was crossed. While Paris was liberated by other units, Third Army's unauthorized advance had helped make that liberation possible by collapsing the German defensive line. The tactical vindication didn't change what had happened at Portsmouth. Over the following months, Patton tested the boundaries repeatedly. He always pushed for more fuel, more ammunition, more authorization to advance when other armies were told to halt. He complained bitterly about being held back, about supply priorities going to Montgomery, about opportunities wasted. But he never again disappeared an entire army. Eisenhower managed Patton the way a rider manages a powerful but unpredictable horse. Firm control, clear boundaries, but also recognition of what that horse could do when pointed in the right direction. He kept Patton on a shorter leash than other commanders. Yet he also gave Patton the missions that required speed and aggression. The breakthrough operations, the exploitation advances, the battles where audacity mattered more than caution. Because for all the problems Patton created, for all the headaches and near disasters, the man delivered results no other American commander could match. Third Army went on to cross the Rhine, drive deep into Germany, and link up with Soviet forces in Czechoslovakia. Patton's tactical genius helped end the war in Europe. But the command structure that made that possible, the coordination between armies that allowed final victory, depended on the lesson learned that August day at Portsmouth. Military historians would debate for decades whether Eisenhower made the right choice, whether tactical brilliance justified insubordination, whether one man's genius outweighed the needs of military discipline. But in the moment, faced with an imperfect general who won battles and an operational plan that required modification, Eisenhower made a practical decision. He kept the weapon, but he put a safety on it. The confrontation revealed something fundamental about coalition warfare and modern military command. The tension between the aggressive field commander who saw opportunities and seized them, and the supreme commander who had to coordinate multiple armies across vast distances. Both perspectives had validity. Both were necessary. And the relationship between them had to be managed with a combination of firmness and flexibility that few commanders in history had successfully achieved. Patton never fully accepted the restrictions. He complained about them in his diary, in letters to his wife, in late-night conversations with his staff. He believed until the end that he could have achieved more if Eisenhower had simply let him run. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps Third Army could have reached Berlin before the Soviets. Perhaps the war could have ended weeks earlier. Or perhaps Patton's exposed flanks would have been cut, his supply lines severed, his unsupported divisions destroyed by counterattacks his aggressive instincts had left him vulnerable to. The counterfactuals remain unknowable. What is knowable? Patton kept his command. Third Army kept advancing. And the relationship forged in that confrontation carried both men through to victory. The line between military genius and insubordination turned out to be exactly where Eisenhower drew it that August afternoon. Not in a courtroom, not in a formal hearing, but in a quiet office overlooking Portsmouth Harbor, where the Supreme Commander told his most talented and most difficult subordinate exactly how far was too far. And for once, Patton listened. While the specific details of Patton's radio silence and the Portsmouth confrontation are dramatized, the core elements are historically accurate. Third Army's rapid advance through the Avranches Gap beginning August 1st, 1944, Patton's tendency to push beyond authorized objectives, the tension between his aggressive tactics and Eisenhower's need for coordinated operations, and the ongoing management challenge Patton represented throughout the European campaign.